All right, so moving along here, we have Rudolf Steiner's second lecture in his lecture course on the Gospel of Matthew. And right at the beginning of this lecture, Steiner goes straight to Luke 2. For now, skipping over the two annunciations, the one to Zechariah and to the other to Mary, and goes to the presentation, the scene of the presentation of the Christ baby in a manger to the shepherds who are out nearby. And then an angel appears to them and tells them to go check out this baby. And the shepherds look up and they see along with this angel a multitude of heavenly beings, a whole swarm of heavenly beings who tell him, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men with whom he is pleased. Then they go check out the baby Jesus and say, this is great. But Steiner says what they saw, it was actually the Buddha. Just to get straight to the point, they saw in those hosts of angels, or at least within them, was the Buddha. And then so he spent some time, because the Buddha, the Nathan Jesus here, the one who has come from the priestly line, is going to inherit the astral body of the Buddha, which is a religion based on, according to Steiner, the first religion based on pure love and compassion. Compassion for suffering, since all life is sorrowful. Everything. Everyone suffers, no matter who or what you are. Every animal suffers, everything. And so he wants to address this idea that, so the Nathan boy, who is a bit slow, he's not intellectually gifted. It's the other boy, the Solomon Jesus boy, who has come from the Solomonic line, who has inherited the ego of Zarathustra, who has knowledge. But this isn't a boy yet of love. This other boy, who is not so knowledgeable and is a bit intellectually slow, has the proper love that because he's inherited the astral body from the Buddha. So Steiner pauses for a moment to look at the Buddha's life, which I think is worth going over. Where he says, okay, so the Buddha was originally a bodhisattva being who decided to incarnate into the Kshatriya caste, the warrior caste, the princely caste, in the city of Kapilavastu. Now note that that city is called Kapilavastu because Kapila is the legendary founder of the Indian philosophical system known as Sankhya. Even though the earliest text that we have by Ishvara Krishna postdates the Buddha, it's later, maybe a century or two after the Buddha. Nonetheless, these texts are always older. As I've said again and again, by the time something gets committed to writing, it's already very old, almost invariably. And so it's clear that the name of the city refers to the founder, Kapila, who founds Sankhya, whose name means the red one. There's a lot of solar associations with the Buddha. When he's born, he takes a few steps and gives forth the lion's roar. The lion chases away all the stars of the night, like the lion on the plain chases away the herds. The sun chases away all the stars, and so too will the Buddha's doctrine chase away all suffering. So this is why he's associated with the lion and with solar myths and so forth. So he chooses this city, and his father is Suddhodana, King Suddhodana, and then his mother is Maya. And the conception there, the sort of version of the Annunciation there, is when this miniature elephant flies into her right side. The elephant, for Indian philosophy, is paradoxically, they like this idea that it's the heaviest animal because they once used to be clouds. Indian elephants used to fly around until a few of them alighted on a branch above a yogi who was meditating and disturbed his meditation, so he cursed them never to fly again, and so they fell to the ground and became the heaviest of all animals. So this is a reference to their former state. So the elephant pierces her right side, and then she gives birth to the Buddha out of her right side underneath a tree where she's holding on to the branches. And out comes the Buddha, and he takes his 7 steps and gives forth the lion's roar. I'm the greatest thing in the universe. Here I am. And isn't that the case with all newborn children when they start crying? Me, here I am, to change things. And so that's the version of his birth. And then he grows up in the palace, lives a sheltered life. And it's prophesied that he will either become a world ruler, a Chakravartin, or an ascetic, a great teacher, a Buddha. And so he grows up in the palace, completely sheltered. One day, however, he gets curious. He has married a woman Yashodhara. She has given him a child, Rahula, and now he wants to, so he's had the pleasure aspect of life, the erotic side, the fatherly, paternal side, those kinds of emotions. So he's already lived effectively in the world, but now he wants to see what the world is like beyond the walls of his palace. So he has his charioteer take him out, and they're going through the villages, and they see an old man. This is the first time that the Buddha's ever seen an old man. This character is walking with a stick, and he asks his charioteer, "What's that?" He says, "That's an old man. That's the fate of everyone. Everyone gets old." So they go back, and then the next day they do the same thing, and he encounters a sick man. And his charioteer explains to him, this is sickness. This is what happens to people, and eventually they grow old and they get sick. So then they go back, and the next day they go up the third time, and he encounters a corpse, or a body wrapped perhaps in a yellow shroud, getting ready to send it to the cremation ground. And he says, "What's that?" The charioteer tells him, "That's death. That's the inevitable fate of all life. Everything grows old, gets sick, and dies, and it's irreversible and unstoppable. It is the fate of every living thing, every living human." So the Buddha finally realizes for the first time that life is based on suffering. It is all based on suffering. Suffering is the primary thing. It is the one thing that troubles us the most, and it is absolutely inescapable. So he decides to then devote his life to becoming an ascetic, a wandering ascetic, and he leaves the palace in the darkness of night. One night, leaves, and then begins the process of wandering in quest of how he can solve the problem of suffering. What can he do about it? So first he encounters a philosopher who is a pupil of the Sankhya school. And in the Sankhya philosophy is atheistic, but still metaphysical. And it's a dualistic philosophy based on two principles, the Purusha, which is a kind of monad that's in itself a crystal clear, pure bubble, you might say, like one of Sloterdijk's bubbles, that is the center of the soul and the self. It's different from the Atman. The Atman's a different thing, but it's morphologically equivalent to the Atman. And then it gets entangled with matter, primordial matter, which is Prakriti. And Prakriti is characterized by the three gunas, or the three qualities of Sattva guna, Rajas guna, and Tamas guna. And Sattva guna is the state in a human being of calm, serene, clarity, clear thinking, the ideal state to get to. Rajas guna in a human being is the opposite, fiery, passionate, wrathful, desiring activity. It's the most agitated of the three. Whereas Tamas guna, once again, is the opposite of that. It's just torpor, inertia, depression, let's say, or chakra number 1 in the Kundalini, the Muladhara chakra, dull, inert consciousness. So the goal is then to follow the path of what's called Jnana Marga, which is the path, Marga of the intellect, Jnana, not yoga. There is no meditational practices here. The meditation is strictly intellectual. Realizing that the Purusha, though it is involved in all of this, nonetheless, you have to realize that no predicates can be attached to it, that it is immune to suffering, that nothing that goes on in the world of matter, of Prakriti with the three gunas, can infect it or stain it. And this realization has to come suddenly, and it has to be deep. And that is sort of the solution in Sankhya to suffering. And the Buddha learns about all this, and he says, something's missing here. It's not right. So he wanders for a while again, and then he comes across a master of yoga. Yoga, as it was synopsized by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, is a very old system, but this version of it has been influenced by Sankhya because yoga picks up basically where Sankhya leaves off. Yoga is practical. It's about practice, whereas Sankhya was strictly intellectual, strictly theoretical. And the first line of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is that yoga consists in the intentional stopping of the spontaneous activity of the mind stuff. And the mind stuff is known as citta, C-I-T-T-A. And in plural, it is the citta vrittis. Citta has the quality of the mind of constantly, rapidly being in motion, and it takes on the forms of the outer world. The outer world are impressed upon it, and it takes on the forms of the outer world. But it's constantly in motion, and it's constantly getting you to do things, to desire things, to fear things, constantly puts you into kinetic motion. So the goal is to stop those citta vrittis through the practice of such things as asanas, which are yogic postures. So now we get the practice of physical yoga, but unlike the shallow Western New Age version of yoga, which is a typical American shallow trick of stripping yoga of all of its theoretical ideas and just practicing as a stretching exercise. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it should not be called yoga. That's a joke. That's an American parody of yoga. Yoga consists in finding a point. It might be the bindu, the point between the two eyes, or also known in Kundalini as the Agya chakra. You find a point, or you can meditate on a god. Unlike Sankhya, there are gods in yoga and Ishvara, but you have to choose one. You pick an Ishvara and you meditate on him. So the idea is one-pointed meditation, single-pointed meditation, and stopping the powers of karma. Karma is constantly getting you to do things and cleansing out. It's involved with prakriti and cleansing out the purusha through these yogic practices, ultimately to attain the ecstatic state of samadhi. Samadhi is the state of ultimate realization and stasis. It's a kind of stasis. And at that point, you can gain magical powers called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, siddhis, which confer on you magical abilities. And I've seen this, actually. Some monks can actually levitate above the ground. Levitation is a fact. It's not a myth. Don't listen to the professional debunkers of the world. They're a waste of everyone's time. Levitation is a fact. Siddhis are facts. And you can perform magical abilities because you have practiced tapas, asceticism, for such a long period of time that you gain all this power. But the goal is actually to have the siddhis, but not to use them. You can try them, perhaps, but they get in the way of samadhi, and they're a distraction, and they really set you backwards. So the goal is not actually to use them, but to eventually attain the state of kaivalya. And kaivalya is the state whereby you achieve release, moksha, complete release from the cycle. So yoga also is dualistic, at least this version of it, this later version of it. It wasn't so in the Upanishads when it was introduced by Yajnavalkya in 800 BC, where it was monistic and based on the realization of the oneness of Atman, the soul, with Brahman, the macrocosmic soul. This version of yoga with Patanjali is dualistic and is involved with terms from Sanskrit, rather from Sankhya, such as Purusha and Prakriti. So he learns about this, practices it for a while, and decides he doesn't like it. So he doesn't want that either. It's not doing the job. So he's still looking for something better than this. Then he comes across, he has 5 pupils, 5 early followers who follow him around, and they were most likely Jains, which is my suspicion, because they start convincing him not to eat. And he starts to realize, okay, all life is sorrowful, I won't eat. Because the Jain doctrine, then, instead of Purusha, we have the Jiva. The Jiva is a monad which gets infected with karma, instead of the Purusha being involved with Prakriti and the gunas. In Jainism, the idea is that the Jiva gets infected with karma, which blackens it. And the thing about karma is, according to the Jains, no matter what you do, any action, good or bad, well-intentioned or ill-intentioned, generates more karma, which means it will blacken the soul and keep bringing you back. Every time you generate karma, you come back. You pick an apple from a tree, you've just killed a thing. Now you've got to deal with that karma. So don't pick an apple from the tree. Let the apple die and rot and fall off. Now you can eat it. Yummy. So the Jains wear face masks. COVID must not have been a big deal to them because Jains are still surviving. Many of them are bankers, oddly enough. And they carry a broom to sweep from their path any little insects so they don't step on any bugs. And the face mask is so they don't breathe in any bugs. And you just renounce. And it's a purely mechanical, literalistic understanding of moksha, of liberation, just not doing. That's the whole goal of Jainism, is not doing. Eventually, the ideal goal is to starve yourself to death. This is the best death, through not eating. Because every time you eat something, anything, you're generating karma. You're killing things. So I suppose these pupils of his might have been Jains. Mahavira, who is the last of the great Jain, what are called Tirthankaras, which are makers of the crossing. He's the last, the 24th of them, and the one before him, the 23rd, had been Parshvanatha. But it's most likely that Jainism goes way, way back. since the tradition is that Mahavira, who was a contemporary of the Buddha's and possibly his rival, whom he never met as far as we know, but it's clear from his attempt to starve himself that he came across Jainism, because that isn't in yoga. That's a uniquely Jainist idea. And it doesn't work. He crawls, emaciates himself almost to a skeleton, crawls over to a river for a drink of water, and then a young girl gives him a bowl of rice, and he decides to eat and come back to the land of the living. At that point, then the 5 disciples take a hike. They leave him. So they had to be Jains, even though the tradition doesn't say that, but it's pretty clear that they must have been. So he decides to live and go under the Bodhi tree, a papal tree, and vows to stay there until he achieves awakening. That's what the Buddha means, the awakened one. And the awakening comes after he is tested by Kama and Mara. Mara, the god of death, actually sends him an army to try and scare him, but it doesn't work. He touches the earth, and the earth vows for his pure karma for all the previous lifetimes that he's been through. He's been through countless lifetimes, so he's earned the right here to sit immobile. He tempts him with dharma. You should be in the palace. You're a prince doing your duties. That doesn't work. Social propaganda and journalism. We need to resist this. We need to resist that. None of that. And then finally, Kama, erotic desire through 3 maidens, 3 beautiful young women who approach him, maybe with some porn. That would be the equivalent today. And he says, not interested, not going to happen, because now he's attained nirvana, which means blown out. Nirvana, so you're blowing out the flame that burns inside the self, that constantly leads you to desire things, or be afraid of things, and react. Nirvana is a psychological stance that consists in indifference to suffering, indifference to either desire or fear. It's a state that's psychological. You don't have to starve yourself to death. You can still live a normal life, raise a family, but just be aware of that detachment. And if you don't think that nirvana is real, for those of you who don't know about this, go pull up the Vietnamese monks who lit themselves on fire in Vietnam and sat quietly burning away without making a sound because they had attained nirvana. It works. It's a real thing. So that's the idea of nirvana, and that's just what the Buddha discovers. It is nihilistic. I've heard some people try and tell me recently that it's not nihilistic. It absolutely is nihilistic. It is based on blowing out the Rig Vedic flame that first was the fire of the Vedic fire altar, into which they had these little portable fire altars because they were Indo-Aryans originally, these Vedic peoples, and so they always had these little portable altars where you could sit and pour offerings of melted butter to feed the gods. Feed that fire. Life is an ever-burning fire. Feed it. Add more to it. That's the idea. And it's also the idea all through the Vedic tradition. Life is an ever-burning fire. Feed the fire. The Buddha says, blow the fire out. It must not be fed. The ultimate reality is nirvana. And this will eventually not only detach you from suffering, but get you out of the round of rebirths, samsara, so that you can attain liberation. It's not Atman. There is no soul there. There is no self there. The gods need not apply. We have no need for them. That's nihilism. Make no mistake about it. This is early Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism is a much later development and is not nihilistic. It does a turnaround and brings all the gods and the metaphysics back and the myths and the bodhisattvas and all that stuff. It's a completely different religion almost that develops around the year 0-ish, first couple of centuries there with Nagarjuna and the great metaphysicians of the Yogacara school and all of that. So Steiner recaps the life of the Buddha, and then he says, now, so that's the vision that appeared to the shepherds, this vision of the Buddha, and the Buddha having an interest in this life of Christ is going to give to him essentially his astral body, which is based on love and compassion, because the Buddha has tuned the frequency of his astral body very, very highly. So it's been perfected, and by the principle of spiritual economy that Steiner invented, when something is that perfected, you don't want to lose it. Most people who go to the other side, the etheric body disintegrates within 3 days. And the astral body disintegrates after a while as well, so that you're just left with the ego monad that has to rebuild a new astral body, a new etheric body, and eventually find a new physical body by choosing your parents, which we all do, by the way. And so that's the process that takes place. So with regard to, Steiner comes back around, and he says this is the vision that the shepherds would have seen, but now he wants to draw your attention to this character named Simeon, who then, in the famous presentation of the Christ child in the temple, this individual Simeon is a very old man, and he wants to go see the Christ child, and then he sees him and he says, now I can die. I've seen the Christ child. I won't live to see him, but now I've seen the glory here. So Steiner draws your attention to, there's a character also who's similar to this in the Buddhist nativity myths, let's say, named Asita, who's a rishi who has magical powers, who flies from the Himalayas all the way to Kapilavastu to see the birth of this being, and he goes in and he sees it, and he starts weeping, and they say, why is this making you cry? And he says, because he will become a Buddha, not a Chakravartin, a Buddha, and I'm crying because I won't live to see him grow and develop. So Steiner says that this guy actually then reincarnates as Simeon, the character who goes into the temple and sees him and then says, now I can die. So, and that's it for lecture number 2. Just a recap of the basic ideas of Buddhism and the life of the Buddha. And then next we'll move on to lecture number 3.